something.
I wish I knew how
Your eyes are like
to
starlight.
break
I'll take your hat, your hair looks swell.
I ought to say no, no, no,
Mind if
sir.
I'm moving
At least I'm gonna say that I tried.
what's the sense of hurting my
I really can't stay.
Baby, don't hold out.
But it's cold outside.
Hey, baby.
Hello, darling.
Say something in French, baby.
Il va pas me lâcher, ce gars-là.
How handsome I am.
Yeah, right.
I'm singing, I'm in a studio.
John, let's make Quiet your new favorite.
I really can't stay.
Honey, that's my part.
Sorry.
It was out of rhythm.
I knew it was out of rhythm.
Hey, Mike, say something in German to me.
Das ist doch kalt.
Okay, well, you could use a breath freshener right now.
You know I don't mean it. I've never seen a blizzard before.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
I simply must go.
Baby, it's cold outside.
The answer is
But
no.
baby, it's cold outside.
Welcome has been
How lucky that you dropped
and
Look out the window at that storm.
my sister will be suspicious.
Your lips are
My brother will be there at the
like waves upon a
door.
tropical
My
shore.
maintenance mind is vicious.
Your lips are
Well, maybe just a peppermint more. I've gotta get home.
Baby, it freezes out there.
Lend me a
It's up to your knees out there.
You've really
I
been
feel you
grand,
touch my
but
hand.
don't you see?
How can you do this thing to
There's
me?
bound to be talk
Think of my
tomorrow.
lifelong
At least there will be plenty implied. I really can't stay.
Cold,
But it's cold. Baby, it's cold.
The following is a paid commercial program. Opinions expressed are the sole responsibility of the party expressing them.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd work for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife. Thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
Well, good morning, Utah. This is Hans Anderson here on K-Talk, K-Star Radio. I've got friends in a number of radio stations, but
From
this
the
is the one I
lakes
go
of
to.
Minnesota
Hey,
to
I
the
hope you'll
hills
enjoy
of Tennessee.
what I've got to discuss with you this morning. I hope if you feel like participating, you'll call in and feel free to participate. Hans Anderson, give us a call here, 224-1414, here on K-Star. I got up this morning and saw something on the news I did not enjoy watching. My daughter called and said, turn on the television, and there it was on Channel 5. The Tabernacle in downtown Provo was burning. I listened to it. They said they got a call about 2:40 in the morning, and they'd been there fighting the fire, watching it here just a few minutes ago. There's still a little steam coming up out of it, but the roof's caved in and the thing is burned. I remember back 81, 82, they spent a lot of money, the church did, restoring that place. Trying to make it nice. Back in the 50s, they'd restored it. That building was built back in the 1880s. That's a real landmark. I was sorry to see it go. Our stake held its first stake conference down there. I've had a son and a daughter-in-law graduate from law school down there, neighbors that graduated from schools down there. Been lots of church pageants down there. They're getting ready for another Christmas program this evening that obviously is not going to take place. But that's sad news, and that's part of life. Things you enjoy, sometimes you lose them. Well, I was listening to Donna's show this morning before I came down. I listen to it quite often, and the things she was talking about made me think about things I'm going to be talking about here this morning. And again, I hope you'll participate. Donna talked about the fact that sometimes when a nation goes wicked, righteous people suffer also. The Lord doesn't just let you walk off. Eventually, like in the case of the Nephites, the Jaredites, the Mulekites, Israel, when they got up and left a few times, even after they were here, remember the Nephites, they got up and left the more wicked Nephites. And the Lord sometimes hauls people off and lets them escape the tragedy that's about to take place, but other times he doesn't. You have to sit there and just suffer when the majority reject God, reject his teachings. Donna was talking about how Jeremiah asked, well, how come I've got to suffer? I've been telling these people to repent, and you're going to haul me off too? And the Lord said, yeah, you're going to get hauled off into captivity also. And you read of other prophets. You remember Nephi, we've talked about him in the past up on the tower, talking about why me? Why couldn't I have been born 600 years ago when being loyal to God was a great thing, and Nephi was our leader, and he had righteous people with him, but he was moaning that this is my day. I've got to put up with these people that have adopted a wicked government. And, of course, we've talked about that in prior shows, but what causes this to happen, this type of suffering? Why does God let this happen? Well, he loves agency. You know, you and I can't even grow. We can't progress. We can't accomplish what we've come here to do unless we're given our agency. We have to have the right to choose, and God gives it to us. And as we've discussed in the past, some nations, a few, the Nephites for one, us is the second one in recorded history where people have had the government being self-elected and the gospel on the earth at the same time. It's a rare event, but we have it. And some of us don't appreciate it. A few weeks ago I was talking to a friend of mine who's lost his faith in God. He's lost his faith in the LDS Church. He's lost his belief in the Bible, in the Book of Mormon. He no longer believes that God rules in the affairs of men, and this fellow has been active in the church for years, been a missionary, married in the temple, but he's lost his faith in God. He doesn't see God's hand in his life. We were discussing some of the church things, and he was saying, I find it strange now to think I ever believed that way. And I felt so sorry for him, because his God is no longer my God until he repents and comes back. You know, my God is so great, he's all-powerful. He's so great that when Moses spent some time talking with God and God showed him some of his creations, Moses stated, now for this cause I know that man is nothing, which thing I never had supposed. He had not understood, even though he was God's prophet and trying to be obedient to him, when God opened the gate a little farther into the heavens and let him look, he said, man is nothing. Well, that's my God, and he rules in the heavens. He created those heavens. He created this earth. He created everything on this earth. And after creating this earth, you and I enjoy He is still so aware of you and I. He knows us intimately. Well, let me give you one of the evidences. He knows what's going on. Remember when Christ was teaching his disciples about his Father in heaven and about the relationship which God has with us. He said to his disciples, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings, and not one of them is forgotten before God? But even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore. Ye are of more value than many sparrow." That's out of Luke chapter 12. Well, that's my God. You know, in my darkest hours, my God knows me. I have these scriptures to prove it. I have feelings that he's given me that prove it. In my darkest hour, I can put my hand up in the air and I can grab a hold of my God's hand through the clouds and hang on. And even when I'm hurting, I can say to my God, "Whatever thou hast allowed me to go through, whatever is about to happen, I will still cling to thee. I will not let go." Why? Because I know God lives. And I feel sorry for those who have lost that, or who've never had that kind of faith in God. You know, Christ knew that the life of being one of his disciples was not always going to be easy. He knew that. When he taught the disciples their values, and he gave them the knowledge that they would be watched by his Father in heaven. Remember, we just talked about not one hair of your head shall be noticed or not noticed if it's missing. He also told his disciples then, this one's out of Matthew, "Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another." So here God, Christ at that time, is telling his disciples, 1, not a single hair of your head will be missing. They're all counted. But at the same time, he tells them, you're going to suffer. Many of you will be killed. You'll be hated. You'll be betrayed. My God, who Moses said after seeing some of God's works said, "Man is nothing," is the same God who also told his apostles, after letting them know how much they were going to suffer, "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also." That's out of John. Well, your God, my God, taught his apostles that where God is, they will also be. God went on to explain this even further to the prophet Joseph Smith. "For he that receiveth my servants receiveth me, and he that receiveth me receiveth my Father. And he that receiveth my Father receiveth my Father's kingdom. Therefore all that my Father hath shall be given unto him." Well, that is my God talking to me. That is my God talking to you, and your God talking to you. That's the one I hope and pray I never lose faith in. That's the one that's walked me through so much. I'm sure he's walked you through much. Would you rather believe in my God or those who have no faith in God? They have no faith, and they have no hope, and usually that generates they have no charity. That's sad, especially this time of year. You never know what's in a man's heart. You're just out there driving around, but God knows. My God knows. Your God knows. You know, if we believe Moses, you and I are like uneducated heathens in a sandbox, or children who look up for the first time and see planes flying over, skyscrapers. And I doubt that's as big a leap of faith as what Moses felt, but it's my mortal effort to try and say, now, what did Moses see that he had never seen before? That's a mortal effort to try to say something like that. You know, coming back here to earth, you and I, we need our homes. We need food to eat. We need clothes. We get sick. I've been sick for a few weeks. We need an education. You and I have to get along. Our future and our God's eternity will be largely determined by how you and I treat one another. We also have the opportunity to participate in this government that we're involved in, which, as I just mentioned, is rare. We get to decide what we will force each other to do. God has billions and billions of children, and we're just a few of them. God lets us take our baby steps with little or no power compared to God. Why does he do that? When up above here, he told the prophet Joseph Smith, everything that God has shall be given to those who are faithful to him, when you and I are puny nothings here on earth today. Because would the rest of us be safe now if we had God's power now? No, we would not. We're still the little child in the sandbox, even those of us who think we're trying to do what's right. God lets us, his children, who he watches every step, make decisions, treat each other as we like, vote as we like, buy what we want, be charitable if we want, be selfish if we want. And all of this is a test to see if we get to first base. If we believe the Scriptures, many of us will not pass the test God has given us. By that I mean it doesn't look very good for the vast majority of us. Of course, we're told that on this earth, few of us are choosing what's right. We're also told that the wickedest of God's children were placed down here. So we're among the scrubs. Let's hope he said the most righteous would be here too, so hopefully we'll be among the charitable. One of my major concerns, and we've discussed this in the past, and it will become a major concern of more and more Americans, is that of our government. Just like Nephi saw it, just like Jeremiah saw it. When you realize twice people have had self-rule in the government, control here in the state of Utah, we've mentioned in the past, here in the cradle of Mormonism, where we have more per capita than any state in the nation, and yet 34.3% of Utah's registered voters participated in this last November election. We're 48th in the nation in voter participation. 48, that means at the bottom, not the top three. We're the bottom third. Bottom number 3. That's not good. And to have such a unique situation of self-rule, yet this is how we treat this blessing we've been given. Just a third of us even participate, and the majority of those vote wrong. To me, this opportunity of self-rule gives God the opportunity to see us in action, in another opportunity to show what we are inside. This ability to vote, it lets us decide what laws and what government we'll have. Here's another thought. Where did we get our federal government from? That a third of us chose to help elect our representatives to. Where did God say this government came from? D&C 101, and for this purpose have I established the constitution of this land by the hands of wise men whom I raised up unto this very purpose, and redeemed the land by the shedding of blood. So here we have the only government on the face of the earth approved by God, and a third of us choose to even participate, and unfortunately the majority choose wrong there. I guess it could be worse if the other 2/3 that didn't vote all showed up to vote wrong too, but they didn't even participate. Well, anyway, the God I worship, he gave me my government. He gave it to me. He cares so much about my mortal experience here, he even outlined what kind of government he wants me to live under during my probation here. And as I pointed out above here, he raised up the men who gave us our government. Some people say, why doesn't God do it different? Why doesn't he talk to me? How come he always goes through prophets? Well, that's the way he does it. From the day that Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden, hardly anybody ever gets to see him. So we better listen to those that are smarter than us. Those are our prophets. And in our day, you and I were given the opportunity by our vote to help defend this type of government our God gave us. You know, when I go to mass meetings, I look around. I'm supposing everybody else is doing the same thing. And many I know, many I do not know. But as I watch the votes and I hear the comments and I talk with people, I kind of get the feeling that most of the people Of course, they didn't have my daddy. But most do not sense that we are involved in a war for the souls of the children of men. And sitting there in that mass meeting are those who want to control you and take away your agency where it should not be taken away, and there are others who want to give it to you. And both are great believers, and it's been going on since the beginning of man. Those who wish to give man his agency, those who wish to destroy it. To help us have a better idea what we ought to believe, God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. And if you go back and read the Old Testament, Moses broke out the punishments for violating some of those laws in the 10 Commandments. If you go back and read it, he says he got his punishments that he outlined for those who break God's laws from God. The liar, the thief, the murderer, the adulterer, the violators of those commandments had clearly outlined punishments for violating those laws. Others of God's laws, they did not have detailed punishments. Not caring for our parents, people who coveted other men's property, people who did not worship God with all their heart. Some of these commandments that Moses gave us to help us return and live with God, they did not have direct penalties associated with the violation of those commandments. My God believes in government, but he also discerns between those things he tells us to do or not do, which have a physical punishment associated for violating them. Some he tells us to punish us, our fellow man for. Others, he says, leave them alone. I'll take care of that in the next life. That punishment in the next life, he'll decide how serious that will be. Since we mortals often can't seem to discern what commandments we should violate, or not what we should violate, but if we do violate them, what the punishment should be in this life and which ones should be waited on until the next life, we don't have an understanding of a lot of this, so God's given us prophets who have condemned the socialist, the compulsory charity saint, who want to use the devil's methods. They tell us what's evil. And as President McKay has said, which I've said time and time again before, this is not just a political decision, it's soul-destroying. Well, it's this time of year when we are just finishing enjoying Thanksgiving. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I did. It's a date, it's a national holiday. The early settlers that came here to America, they're the ones that had that first day of Thanksgiving. Then we've had several presidents who said this ought to be remembered as a day of Thanksgiving. Who? To God. My God. Your God. Now we've got Christmas. And again, we can enjoy remembering the mortal birth of our God, who said he would suffer all things in mortality just as you and I will suffer them. And then he also said he would suffer for all our sins while he was here. Those of us who are mortals, we're not perfect, and we need a Savior. We need to repent. We need to accept this Savior. That's my God. With all the things we have to be grateful for, I feel we as Mormons and Americans are taking many wrong steps, just as the Nephites did. When they were given self-rule and proceeded to change their laws and elect unjust leaders and corrupt the very government and the laws which God gave them. I think we're doing the same thing. If you want to participate here, give us a call, 224-1414. You want to lighten this up and not have such a sober... I almost feel bad following up on what Donna hit us with about we got to suffer. But that's part of mortality. Call in here and light me up if you want to, or I'll just keep it going here. Going back to the Nephites, talking about a few minutes ago. Their first vote for a chief judge was Alma, who was a prophet. Our first chief judge, our first president, was George Washington. Of course, he didn't have the gospel, but except for those who wished to destroy him, he's a man who believed in God, who attributed our success in becoming a nation to God, and who also stated that this nation would prosper and be free as long as we were a moral and a religious people. That's what I believe. I believe that's why God gave us the Book of Mormon. We can see the trail the Nephites went on. And in past shows, I've quoted J. Reuben Clark about the fullness of iniquity, which he described as socialism among the Nephites. I've quoted Ezra Taft Benson, who made the observation that we can learn more about what's going on in America today by reading the Book of Mormon than all our newspapers and books and magazines combined, because we can see the trail that they went on, and we can see the same one, because we choose bad government only when we become a wicked people, and we won't listen to the prophets. I've quoted all 16 prophets on a prior show of condemned socialism and the welfare state. That's not God's way to go that direction. Well, if it's true that socialism is what brought the Nephites, the Jaredites, their fullness of iniquity, I think it's true that might be what will bring us our fullness of iniquity too. We have one cherished hope. That is, we're not going to all get destroyed. We're not going to get wiped out, but we may do what Jeremiah did. We may suffer. I hope we vote. We can be among those who said we tried to go in the right direction, even if we have to suffer. We can let God know his trust in him is not in vain if we do our part. We can be among those who understand and who vote for the proper rule of government, because we've got prophets. If we'll study them, we can see what they've told us. It's not enough, however, just to vote for good government. That does not accomplish it. Remember, there's one prophet, or one king talked about in the Book of Mormon, who said he was a righteous ruler, but he was a wicked man, which, in other words, he didn't have things figured out. Well, we don't want to be like that. How can you and I prove that we've got more than just the government figured out about giving man his agency? How can we prove this to our children? Well, more important than attacking evil is to do good and to live the good life. Those who do not believe in the proper role of government as outlined by God, by our prophets, the socialists, they believe in using force. And their excuse for using force to compel men to be charitable, to compel men to pay for another man's children's education, another man's retirement, another man's food, another man's health care, another man's everything, and to license and regulate him. Their excuse for all this is that man is a fool and he should not be trusted to be charitable. He should not be given his agency. They get confused about the 10 Commandments and think they're going to go a step further, which is what, of course, got Satan into trouble. Wanted to force people to be charitable. We're all going to get saved. We're all going to be good. And as I've just stated, you cannot grow. You do not have the ability to grow when your agency is taken away from you. You get no benefit for doing what's right if you've been dragged kicking and screaming in there, if you have no choice. What have we been taught about this charity that we need to do to one another, and we need to teach our children to do? Moroni, towards the end of the Book of Mormon, quoted what would have been a general conference talk in those days. Moroni quotes his father Mormon. Mormon says in part, this is Moroni chapter 7, 46-47, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, if ye have not charity, ye are nothing. For charity never faileth. Wherefore cleave unto charity, which is the greatest of all. For all things must fail. But charity is the pure love of Christ, and it endureth forever. And whoso is found possessed of it at the last day, it shall be well with him." So here, Moroni, quoting his father, chapter 7, here right at the very end of the Book of Mormon, he's teaching us be charitable. That is the pure love of Christ. And this is what he's teaching us, even though he's finishing up the last man, having watched the destruction of his own nation. You and I, we can vote and we can prove every election that we oppose socialism. And we can prove by our vote we support our prophet. That man who's smarter than we are, and we have to trust him. That man is our prophet. David O. McKay made it clear when he said socialism is soul-destroying. So this isn't just a political vote and the majority wins. Majority may win who's going to be elected, but it's still soul-destroying if you voted the wrong vote. You and I, to grow and progress, we've got to have our agency, and we have to teach that to our fellow man. And one of the best ways to teach that the socialist is wrong is to be charitable. We do not need socialism. If we can go and teach the poor to work, if we can teach them to take care of themselves, if we can help them in their hour of need, if we can prove we're charitable, that man will not turn towards socialism. I have friends who used to be socialists. They used to be liberals who believed in Marxism. They didn't know they were Marxists, but that's what they believed. And I've talked to these friends about their attitude before they changed, got smart like you and me, I suppose you could say. Well, they told me that at the time they believed in socialism, they believed that conservatives, the right-wingers, the Ezra Taft Benson Coots, the homeschoolers, the follow the prophet, those kind of people like you and I, the listeners here, believed that what we believed in for one reason. We were selfish people. If we did not believe in forcing people through socialism to participate in public education, if we did not believe in forcing him to participate in Social Security, if we did not believe in forcing him to provide food stamps for the poor, if we did not believe in forcing him to provide housing for people who can't afford to pay their rent, or housing for the elderly, or Medicare, Medicaid, if we did not believe in these things, we were not charitable people. We were selfish people. That's why we believed what we believed. Well, the best way to prove that that is not true to these people, these non-believers, is to be charitable, to be the kind of people that give. And it's not just by chance that Utah happens to be the most charitable state in this nation. We are. We do more hours of service than any state in this nation. That will help us. But at the same time, if we still use our agency to force others to be charitable, then we've joined the socialist. We've lost track of what God wants us to. Another product of charity, and I know this is true, I have my own testimony of it, that if you get involved in helping other people, do you know your own grief, your own financial problems, your own emotional traumas, whatever it is you're going through, all those things which drag us down and seem like giants standing around us, and we can't move our feet. Those things, when we're involved in helping other people, become small, manageable things that we can take in stride. And we don't need to be buried in our grief. I know that. Again, people who have never actively gone out of their way to be charitable are missing an understanding of what I've just said, but it's true. You know it's true. I know it's true. It takes faith to give of your time and your means to your fellow man or woman, to go out of your way. Maybe that's why Paul, Mormon, Moroni here, spoke so positively of it and talked about the necessity of it. That's the most godlike trait that you can have. Don't just vote against the socialist. Prove to your children by your actions that you don't need a socialist. God has a better plan to help the poor. Let me make another suggestion to you this time of year. You know, often people who are hurting the most, they can hardly put one foot in front of the other. They are loaded up. The best thing they could do is to be charitable, but they can't move. They're frozen. This time of year, of all times of year, if you know someone who's hurting, someone who's having financial destruction come around them, and I know people like this, people who are having marriage destruction or kids going through self-destruction, let me encourage you to call them and take them by the hand, so to speak. Take them with you. They can't pick themselves up and go do something charitable. You take them with you. And don't take that person with you out of a sense of proving to that person how charitable you are. That won't be in your mind. It might be in others. But you take them because their ability to move their feet is non-existent. They are hurting. I know what that's like. Ask them to go with you. Ask them to help in some small way to be a part of your charity to others. That will do more to lift their burdens than anything else they can do. They don't see it, and they can't pick up their own feet, but you do. You go with them. You help them. God's given us the opportunity to know what the proper role of government is, and He expects us to be in favor of it. But He also expects us to be charitable. We may not fix our government by our votes. That's been my experience so far. But we can fix ourselves and our fellow man by being charitable to him. We don't need to feel as bad about how bad things are if we're involved in charity to others. Invite those that are depressed to help you do this Christmas season. The next 2 weeks, there's no better time to do it than invite them to go with you now. This is a very unobtrusive time to be charitable. Lots of people are doing it. You could do the 12 days of Christmas for some poor divorcee or some abandoned single man, some abandoned grandma, some widow, some single sister. Maybe you could help some illegal who feels like a stranger and a foreigner in our midst. But they stay because this is still the greatest place on earth. We have more illegal immigrants coming into this country than legal immigrants in all the other countries of the world. Why? Because this is still the best place on earth to live. Often people you help will say thank you. I remember one time helping a person who had a mouth that was killing them. A couple of very bad teeth. The face was all swollen up on one side. I took them to the dentist, and they were swollen with pain, and this infection was painful. When we came out of the dentist's office, this person who hadn't been to a dentist in years and years, they had these blood-soaked cotton bandages in their mouth. They looked at me and said, through all that, couldn't hardly speak. Besides the stuff in their mouth, they were still not euthanized, what they call it when you can't feel. Anyway, they said thank you. And you could see it in their eye when they said thank you. They meant thank you. Because they knew that I did not have to care. They knew I didn't have to help them. They knew I was not rich, but I helped. I saw someone in need and I helped them. You know, I felt good. And that person knew another human being cared about their pain and stepped into the breach to help them. You know, you take one of your children to a doctor, to a dentist. They may say thank you. Not very often. But they think that you owe this to them. And if anything, you should have done something to lighten the pain they just went through. After all, they're your children. You're supposed to take care of them. You owe it to them. They expect it, and they seldom appreciate your effort on their behalf to help them. But you take someone who you do not owe, someone who cannot return your charity, someone who knows you have no obligation to help them. You help them. You will feel good, and they will feel good. And God will bless you. He'll lighten your burdens as you lift the burdens of others. This battle we're engaged in is between men and women who love God and their fellow man, and those who reject God and God's plan for charity between men. You know, in most of my shows, I've talked about the political beliefs of God's prophets. They believe in people having the right to choose to be charitable, but to never force a man to be charitable. This ability to choose between these two plans is what we fought over in the pre-existence. Today it's a battle between the two great political camps. And I'm not talking about the two great political parties. Anybody that's been watching the news has noticed the, 6,300 pork projects. They all stood up to Democrats, Republicans alike to redistribute the wealth. I look at that bunch, and every time I look at them, well, not every time, but often enough, I think of the drawing I saw back in grade school of Nero playing his fiddle after burning Rome. Those are my political leaders. They just don't get it. They don't understand. Well, the two great political camps, you and I are a part of it, whether we want to be or not. On one side is that belief that man should have his freedom to choose to be charitable and should be allowed self-rule in many other areas of his life. On the other side is that group that believes man is a fool and should be forced to be charitable. There is no area of his life where man should not be forced. That's what they believe, to straighten him out. I've referred in the past to Whittaker Chambers' book, Witness, where he was a communist. He believed like the communists. He believed in this compulsory charity, that man was a fool and needed to be forced. After he left the Communist Party and looked back on where he had been, what he wanted to do now, he wrote, "I have sought too to report more painfully how out of my weakness and folly, but also out of my strength," his strength was that he cared about his fellow man, but he went in the wrong direction. He says, "I committed the characteristic crime of my century, which is unique in the history of men for two reasons. In the first century since life began, when a decisive part of the most articulate section of mankind has not merely ceased to believe in God, but has deliberately rejected God. And it is the century in which this religious rejection has taken a specifically political form. He saw what my father used to teach me, what I believe you see, what I see. This is a religious choice to be a socialist. Has taken a specifically political form, so that the characteristic experience of the mind in this age is a political experience, which is one of the reasons I harp on this. It looks like it's political, but as he goes on to point out, at every point, religion and politics interlace, and must do so more acutely as the conflict between the two great camps of men, those who reject and those who worship God, becomes irrepressible. Those camps are not only outside but also within nations." That's what he was a part of, the other side. And he left it. He says, in the end, the only memorable stories, like the only memorable experiences, are religious and moral. He broke his tie to the Communist Party and his rejection of the Communist Party to morality. And he had a religious experience. You read the book, you'll see what it was, what turned that man. This man who fought on the side of the socialist, he fought on the side of the New Deal, finally left it to join you and I, the Christians. And to him, and to me also, these discussions, as I've said again and again, they sound like they're political, but these are not political. They're religious. He saw it. I see it. I believe you see it. The Chambers saw it. My father saw it. The prophets have seen it. David O. McKay, give it to you again. During the first half of the 20th century, we have traveled far into the soul-destroying land of socialism. Does that sound like political? Just political? That is religious if you're destroying a man's soul. Chambers saw socialism as rejecting God. Do you see socialism as rejecting God? President McKay said socialism was soul-destroying. That sounds to me like rejecting God also. Or we're being taught to reject God in our schools. I want to say that most of our nation's children spend a great deal of their day in public schools. Every day. I've complained about our school board in the Alpine School District here that I live in. I suppose most others like it also. What does the Alpine School District have? What do they promote? Well, they've decided they're not going to be neutral about not teaching about God. So they're going to teach us secularism. They're going to teach us humanist ideals. They're going to teach us atheism. They're going to teach us socialism. And they're going to spend us right under the table. You and I stand back, not aware of what's going on often, because we say, well, the bad guys, and unfortunately they really are the bad guys, say we can't teach Christ, we can't teach Christianity. Why is it, however, that these people are not satisfied just to not teach Christianity, but to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, but they also have to go after social justice? They have to teach socialism. They have to teach progressivism, because that is what they're teaching our children. I pointed out in a prior show, when this state said, okay, we're going to have public schools, who did they have as the first superintendent of schools in Utah? John Taylor. This is before he was the prophet, but at that time he was the most outspoken, most critical person of all the general authorities of the public school system. And so who did they put in? John Taylor, because he knew the evil of it, and he was going to stand there and try and stop as much evil as he could that would come gushing out of the public school system once a government system was set up. That was who they chose. They wanted a man who was fully appraised of the situation. Unfortunately, we're not doing that today. The leaders today, they've embraced the socialist, the communist, the atheist, the humanist, the secularist. And that's what they're teaching our children. And we don't know how to stop it. Well, we know how to stop it if enough of us wake up and vote right. President McKay, after the Supreme Court back in 1962 struck down prayer in our schools, that's when they started taking the Ten Commandments off the walls. He stated, and this is out of the Relief Society magazine, December 1962, page 878. They don't have that anymore. That goes way back. Goes back to my day. Anyway, this is a quote from President McKay. The Supreme Court of the United States severs the connecting cord between the public schools of the United States and the source of divine intelligence, the Creator himself. That's pretty devastating. Let me give you that one again. A lot of people don't like this. A lot of people don't believe it. But again, this is my prophet speaking. The Supreme Court of the United States severs the connecting cord between the public schools of the United States and the source of divine intelligence, the Creator himself. That was by a vote of 6-1. Do you see why some of the critics of the Supreme Court call that a bunch of dirty old men dressed in black? A prophet says the cord between our Creator and the public schools has been severed. You know, that decision was later used to prohibit even a moment of meditation. In one of the southern states in Alabama, in the Alabama schools, they used to say, well, we can't pray, let's have a moment of silence. The Supreme Court struck that down. You can't even have a moment of silence. Somebody may think you're praying here in our schools. A pastor in another church had led a prayer at a high school graduation. That was stopped. A student led prayers at high school, another Supreme Court decision. That was stopped. Maybe some of you remember what's it been, 10, 15 years ago, when a valedictorian in Salt Lake, a student, was speaking, and he talked about God and how one of the administrators of their district got up and tried to stop him and tried to stop a song they were singing. Can you imagine living in a world like that? Is it any surprise secularism, socialism, humanism, evolution, and atheism are a part of our school districts here in Utah? You walk a fine line, but you don't have to go on that side of it. And unfortunately, that's what so many of our school leaders are doing. And that's why it's no surprise The number of people that are opting for home schools, they're opting for private schools, they're opting to take their children somewhere else. Because, as John Taylor warned, if you turn your children over to people like that, how can you expect to get into the celestial kingdom? That's your greatest responsibility in this world. You've got to try and protect them. Well, let me throw that sobering thought out again here. The Supreme Court of the United States severs the connecting cord between the public schools of the United States and the source of divine intelligence, the Creator himself. David O. McKay, Relief Society magazine, December 62. Well, what can you and I do about this? Well, you and I need to teach our children to pray. We need to read them their scriptures. We need to teach them our values. And the value I've tried to push today, we can talk about the evils of socialism, prophets do, and we can quote them. But you and I, the greatest good that we can do in teaching our children to reject socialism is to teach them by being charitable. We can preach virtue, but we can practice it better. We can preach charity, but we can practice it better. We can preach honesty, but we can practice it better. That's how our children will learn we do not need the socialist. We do not need the humanist, the secularist, who has a moving target for what's right and wrong. And when enough of us, when enough men adopt Christ's ways, socialism won't have the lie to tell that socialism is necessary, because man will not help man learn to work, and man will not be charitable. He will not help the person in need. Years ago, I helped a fellow. I took him to this is another story, another illegal. Took him to a doctor because this fellow had a serious addiction problem. And he couldn't overcome it. He had fought this thing for 3.5 years. And I went in there and took him to the doctor, and I expected a $700 or $800 bill because I'd talked to the nurse before making the appointment to go help this man. I'd talked to his wife about not the doctor's wife, the fellow that had the addiction. But when I got in there and we got through talking with this fellow, the doctor, he looked at me and he said, does this man have insurance? The fellow didn't speak English too well. And I said, no. And then he said, who's going to pay for this? And I said, well, I am. And he said, who are you? I said, well, I'm his friend. And then the man said to me, the doctor said, well, I'll charge you $100 then. You know, that made me feel pretty good. Now, not to pay the fine or the fee. And the nurse said, well, if you pay it today, I'll give you 30% off. Just charge you $70. You know, I could say how lucky I was, but who really paid for that? That doctor paid for it. And we were supposed to get another $300 or $400 worth of prescriptions, and he gave those to this man out of his free samples. So I ended up where I thought I'd owned $700 or $800. I ended up $5 or $6 cost, total cost. Well, $70 plus 5 or 6 prescriptions. But there are a lot of good people in this world. You people listening, I assume you're among them also. Teach your children to be charitable. Let them see the happiness in your life from being good. Let them participate. Let them participate in the 12 days of Christmas. Let them participate in going and helping people, mowing their lawns, visiting them, seeing them. Let people lose faith in socialism as they gain faith in charity. Maybe some of you have watched Glenn Beck and was talking about, Wilmington? This city that's almost destroyed. Over half the men in the city lost their jobs, and yet they're pulling together. They've got prayer rooms, and they're looking to help each other. That's the attitude we need. And if enough of us will adopt that in our personal lives and turn to God, we'll reject the humanist, the socialist, and the atheist. They'll reject what is going on in our schools, what they're being taught there, that man is a fool and he needs to be forced to do all these things. Well, I'm getting towards the end here. Let me urge you parents again, do what you need to do with your own children. That is your greatest place to be of influence. Get involved in what's going on with your children, what they're being taught. I had a recent experience. I wanted to see that a stepson of mine didn't get exposed to sex education. Let me give you part of a letter. This is a letter this is out of a general conference talk from Ezra Taft Benson. Let me read this to you. Recently, some parents paid for space in a newspaper to run an open letter to the school principal of their son. The letter said in part, now that's one way to say I don't want you to teach sex without morality. Thank you, I'll do this myself. You are hereby notified that our son is, and they put his name in, is not allowed by his undersigned parents to participate in or be subject to instruction in any training or education in sex, human biological development, attitude development, self-understanding, personal and family life or group therapy, or sensitivity training, or self-criticism, or any combination or degree thereof, without the consent of the undersigned by express written permission. Not every day you're going to see something like this out of general conference, but this one was. We intend to retain and exercise our parental rights to guide our child in the areas of morality and sexual behavior without any interference or contradiction imposed by school personnel. Our son has been taught to recognize the format of sensitivity training, group therapy, self-criticism, as it is broadly applied, lowering the standards of morality and replacing American individual responsibility with the dependency on a conformity to the herd consensus, the concept of collectivism. He has been instructed to promptly remove himself from any class in which he is exposed to the aforementioned indoctrination, to report to us any disregard of this letter. Well, that's one way. Put it in the city paper. Let them know our son doesn't need this, and we don't want him to have it. What can you and I do? Well, we can have family home evening. We can teach our children. We can let the Lord know that in the last days, Satan, who's going to try and destroy our family, our children will know we are not going to be a part of it. We should be grateful that God has inspired our prophets to give us the family home evening program to spend with our children. Hopefully they'll appreciate it, that they'll enjoy it with us, because that's our chance, in addition to church and a few minutes of scripture study in the morning, to teach them correct principles which they are not going to get. We can keep them away from demoralizing entertainment, see what they're doing, see who their friends are. We can encourage them, we can counsel them. Well, I've enjoyed speaking with you today. I wish someone had called in. This has been a rather sobering show, but I've enjoyed sharing it with you. I'll look forward to talking with you next week, though. This is Hans Anderson, Restore America, here on K-Star. And have a good day, and go be nice to somebody, and take your children with you. Thank you, love you, and we'll see you next week.
And I had to start again with just my children and my wife. Thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. Today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
The preceding was a paid commercial program. Opinions expressed are the sole responsibility of the party expressing them.
1400 K-Star is KSRR Provo.
Chestnuts roasting on an open fire, Jack Frost nipping at your nose.